In episode 6 of Becoming Elizabeth, What Cannot Be Cured, we saw Thomas Seymour pay the ultimate price for his recklessness and ambition, Elizabeth betray her former lover, the royal council plot against the Lord Protector, John Dudley come to the fore, and Robert Dudley meet an opinionated and intriguing young woman. Yes, another jam-packed and rather disturbing episode. But just how much of it really happened? Join me, historian and author Claire Ridgway, as I look at the main storyline of this week's Becoming Elizabeth and sort fact from fiction. Let's start with what has been the main storyline in the first few episodes, the relationship between Elizabeth and Thomas Seymour. Thankfully, we didn't have any disturbing flashbacks or uncomfortable scenes this week, as Thomas Seymour had been arrested and thrown in the Tower, and Elizabeth started the episode under house arrest, waiting to be examined. John Dudley is finally sent to her, armed with Cat Ashley's confession, which he describes as being from the lips of someone unwilling, and states that it was dictated by Cat as her hands were busy, suggesting that Cat was being tortured. But what really happened in 1549? Well, Cat Ashley and Thomas Parry, Elizabeth's cofferer, but who's missing in the show, were both detained following Seymour's arrest in January 1549 and taken to the Tower. Cat's husband John was also detained and taken to the Fleet for questioning. Sir Robert Tyrwhitt and his wife Elizabeth were sent to Elizabeth at Hatfield with orders for Lady Tyrwhitt to act as Cat's replacement, but really to act as spies in Elizabeth's household, with Tyrwhitt reporting back to Lord Protector Somerset. So it was Tyrwhitt and not John Dudley who examined Elizabeth and told her of the confessions of Parry and Cat. By the way, there's no evidence that Parry and Cat were tortured. They started talking after spending 2 days in miserable conditions at the Tower, and I expect they were terrified. Parry broke his silence first, much to Cat's horror and anger, and then Cat corroborated what he told the Crown. Tyrwhitt found it impossible to get any information from Elizabeth, and she wrote the Lord Protector stating of the claim by Cat that Seymour would woo her, that she never consented unto any such thing without the council's consent thereunto. She was shown her servants' confessions, which were written in their own hand. She was furious, but remained defiant and firm. When she did write her confession, she acknowledged the truth of her servants' claims, but did not in any way incriminate herself, sticking to her story that while Cat offered her advice on marrying Seymour, it was always dependent on the council's consent. There was no plotting between them for her to marry Seymour. No more information could be gleaned from Elizabeth or her servants. The information provided by Elizabeth and her servants obviously helped to bring Thomas Seymour down, but I haven't found any mention of her encouraging her brother the King to execute Seymour in order to prove her loyalty to the King. I don't think her pleas of innocence can be seen as a betrayal of Seymour, as was suggested in the show. Oh, in the episode, Elizabeth told John Dudley that it was up to him to prove her guilt. But that wasn't the way things worked in Tudor England. When it came to a trial, for example, defendants were presumed guilty, and the onus was on them to prove themselves innocent. As for Thomas Seymour, he did spend some of his time in the Tower writing poetry, and the lines the Lord Protector reads out in the show from Seymour's poem were written by Seymour at this time. Here's the poem in full. Forgetting God to love a king hath been my rod, or else nothing, in this frail life being but a blast of care and strife till in be past. Yet God did call me in my pride, lest I should fall and from him slide. For whom loves he must correct, that they may be of his elect. Then death haste thee, thou shalt me gain, immortally with God to reign. Lord sends the King, like years as noy, in governing this realm enjoy. And after this frail life such grace, that in thy bliss he may find place. It's also true that Seymour was charged with 33 counts of treason and that there was no trial. He was found guilty by a bill of attainder. He was interrogated during his time in the Tower, though, on several occasions, and he did ask for a trial. On his last evening in the Tower, Seymour did write notes, but not just to Elizabeth. He also wrote one to Mary. Hugh Latimer, Bishop of Worcester, who ministered to Seymour on the day of his execution, reported how Seymour wrote these notes urging Mary and Elizabeth to conspire against the Lord Protector. Latimer states that on the scaffold, Seymour said to the Lieutenant of the Tower, "Bid my servant speed the thing that he wots of." When this was overheard, his worried servant confessed. The notes were found sewn between the soles of one of Seymour's velvet shoes. Seymour had secretly made ink and then used the point of an aglet from his hose as a pen. Although the Seymour of the show chose not to make a scaffold speech, Welsh chronicler Ellis Griffith recorded that at his execution, Seymour said, "I have been brought here to suffer death, for as I was lawfully born into this world, so I must lawfully leave it, because there is some work to be accomplished which cannot be fulfilled unless I am put out of the way." He was then beheaded, and it did take 2 blows of the axe to finish him off. Gory, but true. There was no plotting by Henry Grey and Stephen Gardiner behind the Lord Protector's back over Thomas Seymour's death warrant. What happened instead is that the Privy Council, realising that it was a difficult situation for the Lord Protector and the King due to their family ties with Seymour, wanted to take responsibility away from them, and so they decided they would further proceed to justice herein as appertained, without further troubling or molesting in this heavy case either His Highness or the Lord Protector. Following the King's orders, the death warrant was signed by the whole council, plus the Lord Protector. But the show was right in showing the Lord Protector's signature being very shaky, and that's understandable. By the way, it is true that the Lord Protector wasn't in London for his brother's execution, but not because he was taking the King away to protect him from any plotting. He just didn't want to be there. The Mary as Lord Protector storyline wasn't quite true. Bishop Gardiner was actually in prison and not plotting to replace Somerset with Mary. However, there were religious conservatives on the Privy Council, the likes of the Earls of Arundel and Southampton, who wanted to replace Somerset with Mary as regent. And John Dudley became increasingly disillusioned with Somerset over the summer of 1549. The council's growing concerns regarding Somerset's protectorship coincided with Dudley's disillusionment, and that's when Somerset, realising something was wrong, spirited the king away to Hampton Court Palace and then on to Windsor Castle, and played into his enemy's hands by trying to rally a force to defend him and the king against the lords of his council. This was in October 1549, not when Dudley was away fighting the rebels of Kett's rebellion in the summer. Somerset's actions, calling the common people to rise against the royal council, was the beginning of the end of his protectorate. I won't say any more on this. We'll see what happens next week. The timeline was strange again in this episode. Seymour's downfall was between January 1549 and his execution on the 20th of March 1549, and Kett's rebellion was in the summer of 1549, so a few months after Seymour's death. Moving on to that rebellion, it is true that John Dudley was sent to put down the rebels. He was sent following the Marquess of Northampton's defeat by the rebels. Dudley and his forces defeated the rebels at the Battle of Dussingdale on the 27th of August. There were heavy losses on both sides, but it brought the rebellion to an end. Rebels captured during the battle were hanged the following day, but rebel leader Robert Kett and his brother William, who fled the battle, were captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. They were tried for treason, found guilty, and hanged on the 7th of December 1549. Robert at Norwich Castle and William at Windham Abbey. I haven't seen any mention of the Lord Protector calling for mercy for the rebels and Dudley taking matters into his own hands. Historian David Lowes writes that John Dudley refused to allow the local gentry to exact revenge for the humiliation which they'd suffered. And in sharp contrast to what was taking place in the West Country, judicial executions following the rising numbered only a few dozen. Dudley was fair and merciful, it seems. Oh, and the rebels didn't lie in wait for lords and ladies and cut their throats. After attacking and taking the city of Norwich in July 1549, they set up their own local government and began trying cases brought against landowners by commoners. Landowners who were found guilty of enclosing common land illegally were imprisoned. There hasn't been any mention of the Prayer Book Rebellion in the show, and that also took place that summer, the summer of 1549, but in the southwest of England. Perhaps it was too much trouble to include both rebellions, but it was a factor in Somerset's downfall. 2 rebellions because of his legislation. I'm not sure why it's been missed out. In the episode, we saw John, Robert and Guildford Dudley stay with the Robsart family on their way to put down the rebellion. And this is true. Stanfield Hall was the family home, the Robsart family home, and Crown forces did lodge with the Robsarts there. However, Guildford didn't. It was John and his sons Robert and Ambrose. It is likely that Robert and Amy fell in love at this time. Spoiler, sorry, as they married in June 1550. And William Cecil described it as a carnal marriage, so it was a love match. Moving on to a completely different storyline now. At the beginning of the episode, we saw King Edward VI hawking, and he ordered the hawk to have its feathers plucked out one by one while it was still alive, saying it's like everyone does to him. An awfully cruel act. But did Edward VI really order this? No, he didn't order someone else to do it. He did it himself. The story comes from Simon Renard, the imperial ambassador. He didn't witness the event himself, but heard it from court gossip in March 1551. Renard writes, "He is said to have plucked a falcon which he kept in his private chamber and torn it into 4 pieces, saying as he did so to his governors that he likened himself to the falcon, whom everyone plucked, but that he would pluck them too thereafter and tear them in 4 parts. Renard goes on to say that the story has been verified by people he trusts, but that the English diplomat Sir John Mason had denied it and accused Jean de Montluc, Bishop of Valence and a French diplomat, of making it up. At the time, Edward was frustrated and angry with his council, some of whom wanted him to listen to Emperor Charles V's request that he allow Mary to hear the Mass in her home. Edward believed this was giving licence to sin, and he didn't take kindly to some of his council encouraging sin. His council might oppose him, might pluck him, but he would do worse to them. He would pluck them and tear them apart. Edward wanted to show them that he was the one in charge. He was king. I've received a lot of questions about the swearing in the series. The F-bomb is dropped frequently, but we've also had the C word quite a few times, even from the mouth of King Edward VI. Would the Tudors have used these words? No, not as swear words anyway. The F word was known, but not used as a swear word, and the C word was only used for its true meaning, for a woman's vagina, and even appeared in medical textbooks in the medieval period. One example of a Tudor person using the C word is Henry Manox, Catherine Howard's sweetheart. When Catherine's friend Mary Lascelles warned Manox off Catherine due to Catherine's high status, he replied, "Hold thy peace, woman, I know her well enough, for I've had her by the beep and know it amongst 100. He was using the C word in its true sense. But what swear words did the Tudors use? Well, they blasphemed, i.e., they used religious swear words such as God's wounds or zounds for short, Christ's nails or God's heart. These were serious swear words as you were taking the Lord's name in vain. So no F or C bombs in Tudor times. One final point. Although we don't have any record of Mary visiting Elizabeth on the day of Seymour's execution, in 1536 members of the King's Council did try to bully her into submitting to her father, and one did tell her that, were she his or any other man's daughter, he would beat her to death or strike her head against the wall until he made it as soft as a boiled apple. What a bully! I thought this episode was a real mishmash of fact and fiction, and I find it strange what has been used and what has been dropped, the characters that have been missed out, and what has been imagined. I know series like this one don't have any duty to accuracy. They're fiction inspired by history. But for me, Elizabeth's years between the death of her father and her accession really don't need embellishment. They were full of drama, so you could easily get away with retelling history and it still hook viewers and draw people into Elizabeth's story. What do you think? What did you think of episode 6? Do let me know in the comments. If you're interested in spending time with me, 7 other historians and Tudor history lovers from all over the world looking at Elizabeth's real story, then do consider registering for my online event, Elizabeth I, The Life of Gloriana, the Virgin Queen. It starts properly in September, but we're having weekly Zoom discussions at the moment, and we have a Q&A session on the 23rd of July with historian Christine Hartvig about Amy Robsart, who of course featured in this episode. Do join us. I'll put a link in the video description. See you soon. Take care. Bye bye.